Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. Daredevil first appeared in 1964's Daredevil Issue 1, created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett, with some input from Jack Kirby. According to Stan Lee, Daredevil was the product of wanting to create a title for Bill Everett, famous for creating Namor the Submariner in 1939, who was between projects, though funnily Everett only worked on the first issue of Daredevil before moving on. Stan Lee, who knew the flawed nature of superheroes created relatability in the heroes, drawing readers to Marvel stories, settled on making Matt's flaw his inability to see. Everett designed Daredevil's original yellow and black suit with red highlights, and Jack Kirby allegedly contributed the idea of the Billy Club. The predominantly yellow costume proved unpopular in the Marvel bullpen, and Stan Lee suggested an all-red costume, which artist Wally Wood redesigned, creating possibly his most iconic look, kept through large stints of Daredevil's comic book history. Matt Murdock grew up in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of New York, the son of semi-famous boxer battling Jack Murdock, who never wanted his son to make a living with his fists and insisted Matt devote himself to his studies. One day, Matt sees a pedestrian crossing the street, about to be run over by a truck carrying radioactive materials, and while he pushes the pedestrian out of harm's way, the truck's contents splash over Matt's face, blinding him but heightening his other senses to the point where they mimic radar-like sense similar to echolocation in bats. Fun fact, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, the creators of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, confirmed in their universe, published by first Mirage Studios then IDW Publishing, that the toxin that blinded Matt Murdock then rolled down into the sewers of New York, mutating the titular turtles. When Matt's father became desperate for money, he worked with a crime boss, then begins throwing boxing fights. But when young Matt comes to a fight, Jack refuses to take a dive and the mob kills him. Matt becomes Daredevil, taking revenge, beating up his father's killers. Years later, Matt would graduate from Columbia Law School, living a double life as a lawyer and vigilante. Stan Lee left the writing role on the Daredevil book after 50 issues. Lee's run introduced supporting characters, girlfriend Karen Page, and his law partner Foggy Nelson, along with several members of Daredevil's Rogues Gallery, including the Owl, Purple Man, Gladiator, and Stilt Man. This era was also the era that had the bonkers subplot, where Matt Murdock sporadically pretended he was his fictional twin brother Mike Murdock, with a brash personality who can see, to help conceal Matt's alter ego of Daredevil, with Matt pretending that his twin brother was Daredevil's secret identity. Matt eventually faked Mike Murdock's death, saying a new Daredevil had been trained. Over the years, Matt would sometimes still use the identity of Mike Murdock to go undercover, and many years later in Charles Soule's run, a Inhuman makes this fictitious identity real. So for a while, Matt really does suddenly have a twin brother called Mike, till he's beaten to death by Wilson Fisk, thinking he was killing Matt Murdock. Following Stan Lee's departure from Daredevil, classic iconic writers including Roy Thomas, Jim Shooter, Marv Wolfman, who created Bullseye, and Jerry Conway, who controversially moves Daredevil out of New York to San Francisco, which readers felt isolated Daredevil from other superheroes. Jerry simultaneously brought Black Widow into the book to co-star for a time, but readership gradually decreased across these creative teams. In 1979, Jim Shooter put forward Frank Miller as penciler on Daredevil from issue 158, while written by Roger McKenzie, who was bringing his background in horror comics to the book, blending it into the plot lines. Sales continued tanking, and Roger was moved to other work by editorial, but a spec plot Frank had submitted involving Elektra was a contributing factor to Frank being promoted to write and draw Daredevil, beginning with issue 168 in 1980. Frank Miller is responsible for a huge chunk of the Daredevil mythos, and according to Jim Shooter, the book's popularity greatly increased during Miller's run, saving it from the brink of cancellation. Miller's run was also the main source adapted for the 2004 Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. My personal recommendation, watch the director's cut only. It adds 30 minutes of footage, which ties up plot holes and shows a lot more of Matt's life, including practicing law in court. Frank Miller made huge changes to Daredevil's origin, retconning Matt's father to be an abusive alcoholic, a controversial move to continuity-conscious readers, but also introduced the character of Stick, a blind martial arts master that trained Daredevil shortly before he lost his sight, and in issue 168, Elektra Nachios, an ally, love interest, and enemy at various points throughout Matt and Elektra's shared comic history, her proving so popular she'd break out into her own solo series. Elektra is a college student who, after after her father is kidnapped and killed, is trained by Stick, eventually succumbing to evil, joining the Hand, an ancient Japanese ninja clan that worship a demon they call the Beast, and in return it gives them supernatural powers. The TMNT creators parodied the Hand, creating Shredder's ninja clan, the Foot, as an homage. Stick led a rival group of fighters called the Cast, but the Hand have persisted throughout many eras of Daredevil and have also intersected with Punisher and Wolverine stories, among other heroes. Prior to 1981's Daredevil issue 170, when Kingpin, a strong large wall of flesh man who ran New York's crime, first appeared in Miller's Daredevil comic, the Kingpin was considered a Spider-Man villain, but Miller's run not only fleshed out the character to be called Wilson Fisk, but made him a quintessential part of Daredevil's rogue gallery, the two constantly locked in a power struggle for control of Hell's Kitchen and the wider New York. Elektra would ultimately work alongside Matt again, only to be killed by Bullseye as retaliation for a series of escalating fights between Bullseye and Daredevil, leading to Daredevil nearly killing Bullseye. She was shortly after resurrected by the Hand, but while dipping in and out of Daredevil stories for the decade or so after that, largely wandered off having solo adventures in her own book. Frank Miller left with 1983's Daredevil issue 191, but returned in 1986 to write the story arc Daredevil Born Again, with David Mazzucchelli, where Karen Page, Matt's ex-secretary and lover, sells Daredevil's secret identity for a drug fix. Armed with this knowledge, the Kingpin uses his influence to have the IRS freeze Murdock's monetary accounts, the bank foreclose on his apartment, which Kingpin has firebombed for good measure, and a police lieutenant testifies that he saw Murdock pay a witness to perjure themselves. By coincidence, Murdock's girlfriend, Gloriana O'Brien, breaks up with him and turns to dating his law partner and best friend, Foggy Nelson. On the rebound, Matt disbarred and mentally deteriorating, while Kingpin tries having everyone else who knows about Daredevil's secret identity killed, putting Karen Page in the line of fire, and Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich is actively plagued by increasing attempts in his life while he tries to research Matt Murdock being framed. Captain America appears in later issues when a American military-created monstrous killer in the guise of a man with the American flag tattooed on his face and part of the Weapon Plus program responsible for Captain America and Wolverine, called Nuke, is dropped into the middle of Hell's Kitchen with an explosive armory to wage war on the American people for the good of America and to draw Daredevil out of hiding to be killed. Gone was the light-hearted Daredevil. Here was the dark-hearted Matt Murdock that would be the template that almost every writer of the Daredevil book has used since, considered the definitive run for the character by many a reader. Frank Miller departed again, temporarily revisiting the character in a 1983 miniseries called Daredevil the Man Without Fear, alongside artist John Romita Jr. After a few short-term writers, Ann Nocenti, who eventually became a renowned editor at Marvel, wrote Daredevil for over 4.5 years, beginning in 1987, frequently promoting left-leaning politics, mental deep dives, and outlandish stories, taking Daredevil to hell, creating the Mephisto creation Blackheart, and Typhoid Mary, a character that suffered from dissociative identity disorder and is a powerful pyrokinetic with limited telepathy and telekinesis skills. And Nocenti used to run legal cases she wanted to include in comics by her lawyer brother. And Nocenti, I believe, is also the only major female writer to have written the Daredevil comic to date. In 1998, Daredevil was rebooted as part of the Marvel Knights publishing initiative. The reason for the Marvel Knights initiative was Marvel's mid-90s bankruptcy, the same bankruptcy that saw Marvel's movie rights for Spider-Man, X-Men, and other franchises sold off, saw the Marvel Knights imprint hand certain Marvel Comics titles to a company called Event Publications, run by Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada, and instead of Marvel publishing these stories in-house with their own writers and artists who expected to be paid to industry scale, Event Publications used a cheaper roster of writers and artists to write characters Marvel couldn't sell for lots of money, but made some dough still, just not enough to justify paying top dollar for fresh content. Filmmaker Kevin Smith wrote one 8-issue arc on Daredevil Volume 2 called Guardian Angel, hewing close to Frank Miller's tone, focusing more heavily on Matt's Catholic faith, introducing Matt's mother as a nun, and seeing Karen Page killed by Bullseye. Karen has remained deceased since 1999. The character is portrayed by Deborah Ann Wolfe of True Blood fame, alongside Charlie Cox's Netflix and Disney shows, and was portrayed by Ellen Pompeo, the OG Grey, in Grey's Anatomy in the movie. From 2001 through 2006, Brian Michael Bendis, years before creating Miles Morales, taking over the Daredevil book with art by Dave Mack and Alex Maleev, seeing tensions build with Kingpin and Daredevil's secret identity exposed, having stories full of pulp action psychodrama. From 2006 through 2009, Ed Brubaker, with art by Michael Lark, had a critically acclaimed run that doubles down on all the most dour and depressing notes to the Daredevil mythology. Bendis and Brubaker collaborated because Bendis wanted to end his run with Daredevil in prison, like the end of Seinfeld, and an editor nearly talked Bendis out of it, saying, "You can't do that to the next writer," till Bendis chatted with Brubaker and learnt Brubaker wanted to tell the story of Daredevil getting arrested in the first arc, then tell the Devil in Cell Block D story, so the two of them went to their editors to coordinate Bendis getting his intended ending so Brubaker could start his run with Daredevil imprisoned. Additionally, issue 82 of Ed Brubaker's Daredevil run saw Foggy Nelson, after narrowly escaping an assassination attempt by Elektra, stabbed in the heart on a prison visit, left to bleed out on the streets. But, this being Marvel Comics, Foggy actually survived the attack despite a funeral being held for him, and was actually in FBI witness protection thanks to Vanessa Fisk, Kingpin's wife. This run also introduced Lady Bullseye and Black Tarantula. 2010 saw a number of interim writers write the Shadowland comic book storyline, chronicling Daredevil's return to Hell's Kitchen after he becomes the leader of the Hand Clan. He builds a temple/prison in Hell's Kitchen, the eponymous Shadowland. His methods get more extreme as Matt kills longtime adversary Bullseye. The change in attitude brings him in conflict with a number of street-level heroes, including those shown on the omnibus cover on this slide, though online audiences felt the story pulled the punch of Evil Matt too much. In 2012, writer Matt Wade and Chris Samney took over the Daredevil book, delivering a highly praised run, re-establishing his secret identity, regaining his law license, only to have Matt again reveal himself as Daredevil partway through the run, even writing an autobiography detailing his life as a costumed vigilante, leading him to being disbarred in New York, prompting Matt to return to San Francisco, where he could still practice law. This run is known for pulling the tone of the Daredevil book back from the depressive lows of Brubaker's run to something more jovial, mixing old and new elements of Daredevil to rejuvenate the character while remaining true to his roots. Wade's run wasn't all rainbows and puppies, though, having Foggy Nelson battle cancer. It is during the latter part of this run where our 2014 She Hulk series intersects with Daredevil. While they'd been shown on panel together in group meetups, the two characters didn't exchange on-panel words until 2005's House of M issue 5. In this comic, Matt and Jen are seen walking out of a courthouse together, and Jen teases Matt, reminding him that he promised to buy her a drink if she won her case. Matt playfully challenges her to prove that in court. This was the only verbal interaction they'd had on panel prior to Charles Soule's 2014 She Hulk issue 4, which acted as a tease for issues 8 through 10. Quickly running through the decade of Daredevil comics that have occurred following the She Hulk run we're covering for the April 2025 Comic Club. After a several-month hiatus between Daredevil books to accommodate Jonathan Hickman's 2015 Secret Wars, as briefly touched on in the What Joshy's Been Reading section, in 2015, Charles Soule's Daredevil commenced. Being a lawyer, Sewell wanted Matt Murdock to be able to practice law and do so in New York. Otherwise, what's even the point of sticking a then practicing lawyer on the Daredevil book? And the lack of anonymity Daredevil had would have jeopardized every case Matt had come across his desk, as opposing counsel would appeal every case Daredevil won on the grounds of intimidation and vigilante violence. So Sewell rebottles Daredevil's secret identity, with the exception of Foggy Nelson, opting to wipe people's memories using Purple Man's purple children, who have similar mind control powers to their dad, but can also be used as human batteries, boosting Purple Man's own abilities. They use this option specifically over using Doctor Strange, who declines, for throwing shade at a future Spider-Man movie in the process, and Daredevil in comic instantly dismisses the the stupidity of going to Mephisto to make a deal, throwing retroactive shade at Amazing Spider-Man's One More Day arc. In a twist, with his secrecy restored, Matt is a New York prosecutor in Sewell's run instead of the defense attorney he normally is, even getting to argue a case before the Supreme Court. Restoring his secret identity caused ripples in his existing relationships. A side effect of the secret identity being re-established was Matt's long-term girlfriend, Kirsten McDuffie, an assistant district attorney and legal partner of Matt Murdock's, forgetting about half their relationship, and Matt thought it best to break up with Kirsten without telling her the truth and return to Hell's Kitchen. This similarly affected his ex, Elektra, who, similar to Black Cat, when Spider-Man rebottled his secret identity, drastically inflicts emotional damage on her, and in Elektra's case, sends her on a vengeance path after Daredevil for stealing memories from her, fracturing who she is as a result. This is the first run where Foggy is barely on speaking terms with the Matt too. Sewell's run introduces a new illegal immigrant superhero called Sam Chung, or Blind Spot, born in China, living in New York, who creates a store-bought battery-powered invisibility suit. Sewell's run also introduces Ten Fingers, a defector from the Hand, who starts a rival cult, and Muse, a villain who in comics hangs people on meat hooks to drain their blood into buckets and tubed decanters to use the corpses and the blood in his artwork. Sewell's run also revisits Matt and Jen Walters' friendship, having her check a brief Matt wrote over drinks, connecting for the first time since the trial in tonight's Comic Club issues. Sewell's run is also the run that establishes Kingpin becoming Mayor Wilson Fisk, Fisk campaigning successfully following him having protected civilians from street-level criminals during the events of Secret Empire when the superheroes weren't able to, dealing with other threats. Sewell's original run concluded with an arc called The Death of Daredevil. Chip Zdarsky then knew ahead of time he'd resolved that Death of Daredevil arc, but Jed MacKay was tasked with writing a 5-issue connective series called simply Man Without Fear before Zdarsky's Daredevil run started, where Daredevil is gone and Foggy Nelson, the Defenders, the many loves of Matt Murdock, the Kingpin, and a mysterious Guardian Devil have to navigate Hell's Kitchen without him. Chip Zdarsky's run ran from 2019 through 2021, stopped for a 6-issue series called Devil's Reign, then had a 14-issue Daredevil series in 2022 with rebooted numbering. During this run, he has Daredevil recover from the events at the end of Sewell's run. Both Brubaker and Zdarsky's Daredevil runs explore Daredevil in a prison setting, but per Sewell's observations of both, done in very different ways. Daredevil turns himself into the police officer after accidentally beating a criminal so badly that they are killed, going to prison in Zdarsky's run not as Matt Murdock, but as the costume vigilante Daredevil. With Matt in prison, Elektra takes up the mantle of Daredevil to protect Hell's Kitchen, using Matt's no-killing code at odds with her history as an assassin. She got a Daredevil, the Woman Without Fear miniseries, which tied into the main Daredevil comic. Devil's Reign sees Kingpin, having taken Daredevil down, turn his attention to all the other NYC superheroes using his full power, criminal and political power. The 2022 run then sees Daredevil let out of prison and Matt Wilson added as colorist to the book, a name you'll recognize from the Mighty Thor comic cast, and Matt and Elektra co-Daredevil, the trade paperback releases titled Daredevil and Elektra, with Daredevil having his first bearded look in costume. Matt Steedy starts leading the Fist, an elite warrior clan created centuries ago as the legendary rival to the Hand Ninja Cult. Zdarsky's run explores themes of guilt and despair, while leaving an optimistic open ending for the next creative team to take hold of. While Sewell gets much praise, specifically how, in regards to the lawyering, it's how aptly handled, many consider Zdarsky's the better Daredevil book. Then there was a 4-issue fill-in miniseries in 2023 called Daredevil and Echo by B. Earl and Phil Noto, probably to capitalize on the Echo TV show on Disney+. The other most recent verbal interactions of She Hulk and Daredevil are in 2018's Marvel Knights 20th Anniversary Special, 2019's Avengers Issue 20, and 2022's Devil's Reign Issue 3. So a definite increase in the last decade of the two interacting, but still way fewer crossovers overall than most people expect. Currently, there are 2 Daredevil books being released. There's the ongoing series being written by Saladin Ahmed, where Matt Murdock largely sets aside Daredevil to be a priest running a church orphanage, having to resist the urge to be dragged back into a life of vigilantism. From memory, Elektra is still running around as Daredevil 2, even getting another Daredevil Woman Without Fear miniseries in 2024. There's also the Daredevil Cold Day in Hell 3-part miniseries by Charles Soule, each installment being an extra large size 33 pages, where old Matt Murdock, in a dystopian world with faded powers, slings soup at a food center for the poor. But when a mysterious, wrinkly old man interrupts a secret convoy causing an explosion, a deadly gas fills Hell's Kitchen, and this tale takes a turn that will change how you look at the Man Without Fear forever.